Well, good afternoon. Welcome to Citrus. I'm David Lindeman, Director of the Citrus Health Initiative, and I'd like to welcome all of you who are joining us here at Berkeley today, but also our colleagues at Davis, Merced, and Santa Cruz. I'm thrilled you can be here for a very exciting presentation from one of our colleagues from UC San Francisco who's been in the digital health space for a number of years now and is leading, as you'll see, the charge in this area. Before I jump into our introductions and we kick off our presentation, I'd just like to make sure that you know that our research exchanges are online. We do archive them. They're on YouTube, so they are available afterwards, and you can go back to any of the other programs. We also have two announcements regarding two initiatives that are broader. First, our 2015-2016 Big Ideas Contest is open, and the deadline for pre-proposals is November 12th. This is across UC. We have materials for you. You can talk about the different areas, but it's a very wonderful opportunity for people to put together new ideas and to be looking at ways we can create new solutions through information technology. Similarly, we have here at Berkeley a Student Challenge Award that is being offered with a $10,000 grand prize. Submissions due Monday, October 19th. We have information here, and you can get it online in terms of it's sponsored by Dow Chemical Company, their Sustainability Innovation Program. So again, these are both available, and we'd like to make sure you're aware of these, not only what are produced or supported by Citrus, but throughout the entire UC environment. So I'd now like to introduce Dr. Aenor Sawyer, a great colleague who's been doing some wonderful work, not only at UCSF, but she is an innovation champion in digital health. She's been working within the UC system, but she also supports, advises a large number of companies, large institutions, and has historically been available to many new startups in this space. Aenor's key program, though, is the Catalyst Digital Health Resource Center, which is part of the Health Innovation Center at UC San Francisco, where she has led that and has sponsorship from a number of major corporations. She's had more than a decade in helping develop new programs, leading the charge in the innovation environment at UCSF. She also serves as Associate Director of the Clinical and Translational Science Institute, the Catalyst Digital Health Program at UCSF. And on top of that, she's an advisor to Rock Health, a very major startup accelerator and incubator in our space, and has even founded her own program, Trinity, which is part of the CDHI portfolio. And finally, when her spare time, she's Assistant Clinical Professor in Orthopaedics, where she is actually Director of the UCSF Skeletal Health Service. So brings, like we always like to see, the direct experience in working in digital health, what we need from a patient, caregiver, professional perspective. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the program over to Aenor.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity. I can say it's intimidating to come over and speak to this group, but I hope that we'll find some things that sound new and interesting to you and other things that you probably know a lot about and you could educate me on. So it'll be an exchange if it all goes well. I'm going to hit the tops of the waves. It wasn't clear to me what I should focus on, so I'm really going to talk very broadly, do broad brushstrokes about digital health, and you'll see that it's a fairly overused name, and it's unclear what it actually is anymore, but we'll go into that a little bit as well. And also, most of it will come from the UCSF perspective, but also my perspective as an outward-facing person involved in the ecosystem as well. So I'll go through and fasten your seatbelts. We're going to go on a ride here. We talk about digital health as not just the fourth modality. We've had diagnostics, therapeutics, device, and now digital health, but we actually think of it more as the great communicator. And we also think it's the final piece that'll help us really get to the triple aims, which is giving better care to more people at lower cost. So it's a little bit unclear now when we have these traditional tracks, even in our own accelerator, because digital health is touching every one of them. And I think ultimately the term digital will go away and it'll just be health. It'll just be the medium that we work in, as in other industries. So what is it? We actually consider digital health all the way from big data and informatics down to nanosensors and all the software, hardware in between that moves health information around. So we look at it in a very broad way. A lot of programs call themselves mobile health, but for us that's still pretty much defined as tablets and phones, so we like to have a broader approach to it because we're trying to also get away from any more of the siloing of data, so let it run free. Who's involved in it is, you can tell, is many sectors, and you're involved from many different dimensions yourselves already. And what does it do? It covers wellness, healthcare, it covers individual health and population health as well. So it's basically hardware, software. With the cloud, it's nowhere, and since everyone's jumping in, it's everywhere. So that's about the best definition I have for you on that. Who's working on it is really exciting to me, and I don't need to list all the different sectors involved, but some of them I think are special to point out. First of all, it's a multidisciplinary field. If we're going to move quickly and make it effective, we need to bridge across different industries. We're also really finding a lot of the growth happening in cross-pollinated individuals. We now have clinician innovators, like we started building clinician scientists a long time ago, clinician informaticists, but also engineers who have an interest in public health, and those types of cross-pollinated individuals. So we're working really hard, even in our education, to create more of an environment instead of the traditional method where you had to focus very, very narrow and narrower and narrower. We're actually trying to encourage people to bring in different specialties into their quiver. But one of the things I like to talk a lot about, besides the different healthcare, technology, finance, design is an interesting feature we'll hit on. But also I wanted to talk about the fact that it's multi-generational. And for me, that's a very, very exciting part of it. And we have kids, I shouldn't say kids because the ones I'm working with now are all the way into med school, but we have people coming to us now involved in the field. Some are kids. We have 12-year-olds that we're working with who are inventing things with us. But the point being, they grew up in the medium. They're fluent in digital. They expect, actually, things to function in healthcare the way they function other places, and they don't yet. So you'll find that we're moving more and more, being driven by those expectations. And some of the vantage points we have are coming from the youngest generation in our mix of innovators. So I think it's very exciting. And then at the other end, we have older people who have tremendous amounts of knowledge, but might have difficulty imparting the knowledge because of physical limitations. And so when younger people intersect with those people, it's such a beautiful experience because we can enable them with technology sometimes to communicate better, to intersect more, share their ideas, or even tell us what their needs are. So we're engaging people across all generations in this space. It's clearly, geographically, a very exciting place to be. If you look at this map, and this is new data from Startup Health, which is one of the great incubators that they're in New York, but they're roaming around the world doing great things. They just put this data out in the last couple of days, and this is sort of a second quarter update. But last year alone, there was $4 billion spent in digital health, and the portion of that that's spent in our region is almost twofold any other region. So there's a lot of activity, a lot of hotbeds popping up, which we want. We want this to be all the way across, but it's, for your purposes, it's an exciting place. You're sitting in fertile soil for being in this field. And then this is out of Rock Health, again, very good partner, and they have a summit going on today, I believe, but they generate, as does Startup Health, tremendous amount of data for us. And this just shows up to 2014. It shows 2014 exponential growth. So it was a real breakout year for digital health investment. And I'm showing you the investment slides, not because I think that's the most important thing, but it is a gauge. It's a temperature. It's one vital sign that we have to look at the growth in digital health. And there are certain areas that were almost 50% of the funding went into big data analytics, consumer-facing things, digital medical devices, including what is now called the non-pharmacologic therapeutics. Telehealth has grown rapidly, and I was actually happy to see personalized health and precision medicine making the list here now. So the value, at least it's being valued by people who are putting resources into it. And it does matter because no money, no mission, so we do care about it in that sense. And so this is a brand new slide. So this just shows you in 2014 what a breakout year it was. And there actually on track investment-wise for 2015, and I think there were 2 or 3 IPOs this past year. So the field is continuing to grow. I don't think we'll see that exponential leap again, but I think we'll probably match that in 2015. The question is, though, does it work? Is it effective? And when we say effective, we can see it's exciting and a lot of money's gone into it yet, but there's still not a lot of evidence. We're starting to see some really good pilots and some even RCTs coming out, but we are seeing still a lot of funding going into things where there's not a lot of evidence, and we on the procurement side, the healthcare delivery side, are having lots and lots of startups coming to us asking us to pay for something when there's no evidence yet. So there's this really hard place we're in right now. So we think a really important thing is trying to figure out what are the indicators of success for these technologies. We need to know if it's effective in care and cost. Does it improve outcomes, workflow, communication, patient engagement? Does it add cost? Is it net neutral? Or does it actually generate some return? So these are important questions. Studies are happening, but we need to really accelerate that type of information gathering. And I think between our campuses, we have really great opportunities to do this. And it's not just from a nerdy standpoint. It's actually, if it doesn't work, it's ultimately not going to be a good business investment either. So a lot of VCs are coming to us. So we think that there's tremendous hype. It's super exciting. It's been really fun to be on the ride so far. But we really feel obligated now to get from the promise to the power, or as an individual, to the empower of digital health. And we think these are some of the things that we need to tackle. Evaluation, interoperability, this phrase I use called know your audience, I'll dive into that a little bit at the end, and partnering. We think that facilitating more partnering, industry academic partnerships, academic to academic, et cetera, is very critical to accelerating this. So with those things in mind, we opened up what we call the Center for Digital Health Innovation. We're a little over 2 years into this now. And we were a little chastised in the beginning, especially by groups like Rock Health, where I was advising at the time, but they sort of motivated me to put something together, because we felt like when we'd ask what the metrics for success were, it was how many downloads and how much funding. Mind you, they've come a long way, and they've really pushed this field, so I have great respect for Rock Health. But in the beginning, if money was coming or downloads were happening, that was success. So we decided to jump in a big way at UCSF. We had a lot of activity going, but it was sprinkler heads of activity. And I often say that we have these great creative people, but none of the activity was connected by the pipe or the electronic controller. So we had all these separate issues going on. And also people were struggling. How do you navigate the arc of development? It's so different than traditional research. So what we did was we put a center together. We fought through this impression that we are the laggards in healthcare. We get accused of this as far as adopting technology. We actually think of ourselves over here. And ironically, even in the clinic exam room, and I just finished a big clinic yesterday, and I feel like even with every single patient, I'm trying to innovate. How can I possibly do the very best thing for you? And so when it comes to actually building new technologies, we find ourselves always trying to make it better, even though we are responsible, and we have to be responsible and patient advocates, so we might be hesitant to try new instruments each time we walk into the OR. We want to create sandboxes where we can experiment and create and test. So we think frontline innovators have a very, very important role in health innovation. We have certain strengths that we bring to this. We actually experience the pain points, or we witness them in our patients or the family members. So we can get at pretty readily what the therapeutic targets are, a term borrowed from another industry. We also can understand how the new concept might fit into the workflow, or if the workflow also needs to be disrupted. And then we test. We test very rigorously. We test all the way across. We test our ideas as we're standing at the whiteboard creating them. So it's very important that frontline innovators are involved in the process. And finally, we have to swim in our own soup, which means we're actually going to be using these things, or we're going to be recommending them to our patients. So we care very much about the success of them. So we felt like we should organize our approach to how we participate in this whole process. Now, mind you, we are missing a lot of strengths. as a health science campus, we're missing a tremendous amount of things that it takes to get from what we call idea to impact. So this is where we need to partner, and that's why the strengths on this campus are tremendous to us. But you can see all the different pieces we need. So we actually work very heavily on partnering. This is our team, and again, it's a lot of what I call the intersection people. So you see a list of specialties, and some of them exist in one body, and we sought people like that out. And we're still building and filling out the roles, so if this center is of interest to you, please let me know. It's a 4-pillar model. We targeted the things that we thought were some of the limitations. So innovation, we wanted to support our frontline innovators. We wanted to create a really efficient process for validation or evaluation and understand better the processes for that. Because evaluating digital health technology is different in some ways. You still need the scientific rigor, but it needs to move a bit faster. We might use social media for recruitment. We might leverage a lot of different things than our traditional evaluation methods. Integration is incredibly important, and each one of these I'll go into a little deeper. And we also wanted education as a pillar, so we're not just creating things, but we're creating more innovators and more problem solvers as well. So in the first pillar, we leverage a lot of our partners on campus. We're a nidus for this activity around digital health, but we certainly leverage our colleagues on and off campus. One of the great examples of bridging between us is the MTM program. And I might be advising with some students this afternoon, but I certainly have on projects before. And we've seen some phenomenal people and the intersection people coming out of that program where they get an understanding from both sides. So I think that's a very important program. We have many other examples of cross-pollinating between the campuses, but that one in particular I'm close to and more familiar with. So we leverage the CTSI that we have there. One of the things in the CTSI is the Catalyst program. That's our internal accelerator. And we had device therapeutics and diagnostics for some time, and I added the digital health track almost 3 years ago. And it's grown extremely rapidly. It's very exciting. I was up most of the night reviewing proposals again because we're starting the new cycle. But it's a very exciting program, and I invite you to participate in it if you wish. We have a panel of 200 consultants. That's the outside world of expertise that we bring in. And we leverage those people because they are senior in their fields. They're from all disciplines. There's a program of signing NDAs, et cetera, so the PIs and the investigators' work is protected. But they actually help us with 360 review, and then they jump onto the teams if they see a gap where they might fit in that 8-week accelerator consultation period. And then there's a competition, an oral competition in the end. So it's an exciting program. I can also let you know when the report out day is, because it's also nice to see what all is happening over there, and we could make arrangements for you. So these are some of the teams. Not all of this came through Catalyst, but some of these did, and I just only put this up here to show you the variety of things we're working in. Some of these are, this is an app, RaceSafe, which has become the medical record for large marathons now, and it was founded by my colleague Anthony Luke. He's a sports medicine doc. The next one over is an interesting one, and you'll hear about Danielle again. She's a PhD in psychiatry. This is a patient engagement app for one of the most challenging audiences to engage and incentivize, and it's the adolescent schizophrenic patient. So the interesting thing about it is the lessons learned there are really transportable to lessons of engagement and sustained engagement and behavior incentivization in other audiences. MS Bioscreen I'll spend a little more time on. This just shows you we're involved in building tech-enabled education as well. So each of these will go in a little deeper. The MS Bioscreen is a really important technology. This was designed by Pierre-Antoine Gouraud. He has a tech company started in Paris. He's a geneticist and also a technologist. And he started realizing we had the largest data set for clinical research for MS patients. And if you're not familiar with the condition, it's devastating, it's deteriorating. It hits often women in their 40s or 30s, and primarily women, but it also is relapsing and remitting, so incredibly unpredictable. So it's very hard for a person to make plans or to even know where they're going to be. It's hard for us to know how they're going to respond to medications. But there's a tremendous goldmine of data, genomic, phenomic, functional scores, imaging scores, some that hadn't been quantified before this technology got put together. But it was never aggregated easily except for the researchers, and they would sit there and push it together, but it never made it into the clinical conversation. So you can imagine all this type of information, but it wasn't being utilized in the clinical setting because there wasn't a great way to aggregate and display it. And now we're getting closer and closer to where we can show a patient one that looks like them, age and gender matched, ultimately functional score matched, genomic matching, and say to them, well, this is how this patient did, and this is how they responded when we put them on this medication. And it's still in observational analytics right now, but we're moving towards predictive and ultimately prescriptive analytics off of this as we aggregate more data sets around it and follow longitudinally. So it becomes, I'm a cancer patient, so I would love to have that kind of information. Can you tell me how I'm going to do? It's very, very hard. As docs, we try. And we say, oh, you remind me of a patient who looked like you, and this is what they did. And so anecdotally, we're trying anyway. But this empowers the clinician and the patient to have a glimpse in to a little more information, even though it's not yet predictive. So it's extremely valuable. This is a platform that's also being used now in other disease states. These are the ones that have risen to sort of a university level of support. These are large projects in the CDHI, CareWeb, Tidepool, Healthy Heart, and Trinity. The first one is a platform, I'll tell you very briefly, as a physician, how many have ever been a patient? Great. So you understand that there are a lot of different people that you intersect with, and a lot of times you think they're talking and they're not. Well, in a hospital setting, you assume that's happening, and it's actually, there are a lot of breakdowns in that. So the way we communicate in the hospital as a team is pager, phone, bump into the hallway, email, medical record, all over the place. It wasn't being aggregated. It wasn't, no one could see everything at once, and it wasn't being recorded. So CareWeb has created a secure online platform that intersects with the EHR, and the pagers even feed into it. So when the nurse calls somebody, the whole team can look into this aquarium, basically, and see what's happening and stay up to date on the patient. Tidepool was the glucometers. As you might know, a lot of the medical devices that are out there are in proprietary formats, and the companies own the data, they think. The patients actually own the data. But when we went to them and tried to get data from them, two pediatric endocrinologists with type 1 diabetic patients wanted the data. They wanted to make more use of it for themselves and their patients, and they got turned down by the companies. So they found an end around as to how to pull the data out of all these different devices and created their own platform. So this got spun out. This is the partnering example. Because they were docs, they were highly motivated frontline innovators, but things moved slowly because they had full-time practices. So two fathers of type 1 diabetics who are successful, I think, serial CEOs in the Valley said, if we get this out, we'll partner with you and move it faster. So they did. They have. They wanted it to be a nonprofit so the data could never be locked out, no one locked out of it again. And now the glucometer companies are coming to them saying, we want to participate because it's an open platform and many people are starting to innovate on top of it with patient-facing apps, et cetera. So a nice example there. Healthy Heart is a wonderful project that's the digital version of Framingham, if anyone recalls that, the longitudinal heart study. And it's leveraging many technologies, and you'll see a slide on that as well. But you can log in right now to Healthy Heart. You can sign in and participate. And it's a way that people can participate from anywhere in all different disease states or wellness, and start cataloging and tracking and giving input about their own cardiac status. So we are learning tremendous amounts out of that. We're aiming for 1 million participants, and we're now the platform for the American Heart Association through that. And the big pharma companies are coming to us saying, we want to leverage pieces of this for clinical trial innovation, because clinical trials can be $90 million a year and go on for 7 years and go unfilled and fail because of recruitment and saturation around the trial centers. Now, if you can do remote trials, there's a whole world that opens up, the costs can go down, and the trials can be filled much more easily. So we're becoming a sandbox for a lot of pharmaceutical companies to try out some of the new clinical trial methodology. The last one is the one that I've worked on. It's a virtual tumor board model. I had a little personal motivation to do that, and my colleague Pierre Theodore and I have been working on this for a while. And it's basically to represent team-based care in a way that's cost-effective. It's very expensive to get people in the same room at the same time and try to get the pertinent data there. And at the end of the hour, the data all explodes again. It's never coalesced permanently. So we've broken down barriers. We removed the barrier of time, the barrier of geography, and we're pushing hard to get the pertinent data. So it's a secure online platform we can talk more about later. So Healthy Heart is leveraging these technologies that we have now available, social media, multi-sensors. We're leveraging LiveCore. We have partnerships with several different startup companies. And again, you're welcome to participate if you're interested. So pushing really hard in this area of evaluation, we're now not just the ones asking. The consumers are asking, the investors, the payers are coming to us and saying, does it work? So we really felt like that needed to be one of our pillars, also because, as with this university, we should be the experts in how to evaluate. So we have, again, leveraged a lot of our colleagues on campus, and I think some people here may have intersections with some of these, like the Center for Vulnerable Populations down at the General. They're doing phenomenal things with mobile technology in that population. So we work hard with all of our colleagues to advance the ability to study things. We have our traditional centers, and the CTSI now is bringing in a lot of clinical trial innovation. But we also have some investigators who have been sort of out on the edge for quite a while, and you might just log in and look at some of Adam Gazali's TED Talks, but he has been experimenting for quite a while with really edgy digital technology, which is becoming more mainstream. So he worked hard in the area of gamification, especially in cognitive assessment and training. Behind all of it, even though it looks like fun, he's not just pulling games off the shelf. He's actually informing and building them alongside of companies like Zynga, et cetera, specifically for his lab. And he's got the scientific rigor in the evaluation of it to the extent that they've had publications in Nature and the major neurosciences journals. And what I'm demonstrating here is that this is a EEG cap, wireless cap, that he's been co-developing. We do a lot of co-development. So a company that might already have traction or another institution, we might have a piece of the puzzle. And so we try to create these co-development models, and that's been moving things faster. So he's working on building the games, also doing the evaluation and building the hardware, so these can eventually be moved into the home outside of his fancy lab. But this, what he's created up top, might be hard to see with the lights on, is the glass brain. It's much more impressive in a video. But this is actual data that's been pushed into a visualization platform. And this is data from 3D MRI and actual electrophysiologic data. And this individual can play a game and actually watch her circuitry. So she can watch the pathways light up and move along. She could actually drive into the brain and drive around her own brain. That part of it, we haven't really understood if that's motivating or not. It certainly has helped in meeting with industry partners. But the most important thing is that we're finding different ways to take the information and push it up to a place where it's more meaningful by making it visualized. So this is the glass brain, and you can read about that or go online and see more of it. We also work hard in evaluation in terms of sensor validation, and I don't need to speak to this group about that, but what we found with a lot of the consumer grade sensors is that they don't all say that they don't all measure what they're actually saying they're measuring. So there's a lot of variation between them. It might be good enough if you're an individual who's fairly healthy and you just want serial measurements, but if you're really tracking sensitive measurements around CHF and you want to be watching closely, is there a change in the heart rate, the O2 saturation, even your weight? Those are good indicators that the disease might be progressing. We want those things to be validated and accurate, and we also don't want them to drift. We want to be able to count on them over time. So we do a lot of sensor validation, and this is called our Human Performance Center. It's at Mission Bay at the Orthopaedic Institute. This is force plate data. We have 3D Vicom imaging. We've done validation with the Connect and some of the other machines as well. And then we also have a partnership with Samsung for the Digital Health Innovation Lab. And this has been an exciting adventure in industry partnerships. They have originally came to us to help finish building and testing and giving clinical validity to their biometric watch, which they're putting multiple sensors into, and this was rolled out last year, and they're continuing to build on it, and their aggregator platform, which is called SAMI. And so we've been giving clinical use cases, we've been validating for them, and now other types of sensors, other groups are coming to us, and within that lab we're doing more evaluation. So that's another model. Another important pillar to us is integration, and what we mean by this is two things. One is interoperability, integrating data. The other is integrating people, so the partnerships. And on the interoperability side, it's a profound problem in healthcare. And I'll go into that in just a second. But we have new ways of looking at it. We've got informatics across campus in cancer. We've got translational informatics, clinical informatics, bioinformatics. They're coalescing a bit because Atul Butte from Stanford has been recruited to head up the Institute for Computational Health Sciences. So we're going to integrate more of those groups together. But we think we are really well steeped with a track record in innovation and scientific rigor, and we're trying to stay out on the front of the wave of innovation. But I can tell you most of the time we feel like this. And that's because of all the data coming at us now. And it's extremely hard to make sense of it, even if we don't go into the new sources of data, but we look at the traditional sources of data. This is out of the ONC, and what they're telling us is that the consequences financially of gaps in interoperability are in the billions. Every category you go to is billions. If you just look at medication alone, it's $300 billion, and that's just attributed to gaps in interoperability. So somewhere the data journeys got holes in it. And so this is a massive problem. There's a big outcry. There's a really nice report going in right now from the ONC to Congress again. There'll be a report from HIT, from HSS in November about the problems with it. So look for the fall report from the ONC and the HIT reports right now. They're very educational, and they help give you a roadmap, or give us a roadmap for people who are innovating in this space. Then there's the access to ubiquitous forms of new data that we've never really had before. It's super exciting. We can layer on, or if we could layer on, data from our exposome, our biome, our genome, our phenome, all the way out to consumer analytics. We could create an understanding much more deeply and broadly of individual and population health. We have examples of this where Ginger.io, as one of the small aggregator consumer platforms, took data on cell phone usage and compared it to depression severity scores. And you would think that the number of calls would go down as people get more withdrawn. The number of calls stayed the same, but the number of people they called went down dramatically. So in essence, could that be a biomarker for someone going into a severe depression slide and an early indicator rather than waiting till they show up at the ED or don't make it? So we think there are going to be all kinds of new associations we've not ever been able to have before. But we can't really get to those. Oh, and then there's all this. So we have tremendous new sources of data. The problem is we don't know how to manage it right now. We're also getting a shift in healthcare to care outside the building. So there'll be a lot more data coming at us outside of the brick and mortar. And this is a very exciting field. We feel like telehealth and digital health have merged now for all intents and purposes. The traditional ways were in video or store and forward, but we're seeing a lot more remote sensing, remote monitoring, even remote support in platforms like Health Loop, et cetera. So there's a tremendous amount of data that's not even going to be data we're collecting that's going to be critical to healthcare. It's not just fitness data now. So what we need to do is figure out how to manage it. If we could manage it better and we can incorporate it and leverage it better, we can ultimately get to this stream of precision medicine. And I think most of you are familiar with the term. It's a very important initiative on our campus. But the goal is, can we tailor your intervention to your diagnosis that fits into your life? Not just the diagnosis that we're picking up with our clinical tests, but your own choices about quality of life, bringing in the factors all around you. So we want to get more and more towards that direction. And it's population and individual. So individual is more personalized medicine, but we're looking at it on a grander scale. And we're shifting away from an idea of just disease-focused, but tailoring it to patient-centered. And that gets more to the precision medicine. So the whole message here is, if we're going to get to the power of digital health, we have to get the data contextualized to make it actionable. And to do that, we've got to do a lot of things with it. And many of you will know much more about how to do it than I do. But we really need to be able to aggregate data from disparate sources. So that means file conversion, et cetera. But we also need to then, once we aggregate it, we need to analyze it. Are there associations in there that are meaningful? Some will be driven by algorithms, some will create new algorithms, some we will layer artificial intelligence on top of, but the goal would be to contextualize it and get it to the right place so it can optimize decision making. We currently have major gaps in this, even within our own hospital system. We have several different IT systems working at once. For a decade, we've been trying to integrate those, let alone now all the data coming to us from outside the clinical care system. So we've been brute forcing this at UCSF for quite a while, and it's become one of our big missions. This has pushed the industry outside. The really creative startups have been creating these aggregation visualization dashboards. You've probably heard of Ginger.io, TickTrack. Validic doesn't have a visualization, but powerful data pipes. But this is an example of innovation outside. Data's coming to us now where maybe the wearable and the nutrition app are integrated, and maybe patient-reported information comes in too. It still doesn't intersect with the clinical data. So again, this is a nice piece of it, but there's still holes in the journey. So we got very involved in this, and we consider this outside the clinical record, inside the clinical record, and mind you, inside the hospital, it might be outside the clinical record. We thought we knew a lot about bridges in San Francisco, so we started diving in and thinking, well, we'll start building little bridges, and it turned out it was much more complicated, of course, and it's much more like the cell wall. Different receptors, things coming in different formats, things have to be done to it to get it all the way down to a place where you can actually generate amino acids or make use of the data. So it's probably going to look a lot more like this than what we had originally imagined. But we've got a lot of momentum in this now. And besides having coalescing of our informatics teams coming together, we also have an announcement coming out in about a week and a half about a really fantastic partnership we've made with industry that's going to really accelerate this for us. And I really want to come back to you and announce that and find out who might be interested in working in the challenging space of interoperability. We also have an initiative that fits right alongside of that, and it's something that I put together because I was asked to do a conference that was handed to me, basically. Informatics and digital health wanted to put a conference on together. And I always like something to hang together. So I thought about it for a while, and for me, it made perfect sense because those fields have grown up separately. But the truth is, one fuels the other and vice versa. So what I came to is this concept of informed health. And much like we lead informed lives in your phone if you want to get across town, the pertinent data is pushed right to you to optimize your decision. We don't have that in healthcare. We have evidence-based medicine, but it takes about 17 years to get from a finding to practice, and that practice isn't consistent because the evidence isn't pushed to us in our workflow when we're making those decisions. So the idea of informed health is getting the pertinent data pushed to you at the moment of decision making, whether you're a patient, provider, family member, payer, administrator. So I call it now point of choice rather than point of care, because a decision maker could be anybody, any stakeholder. Pertinent data pushed to you at moment of choice. That's informed health. And it's the way we're leading other parts of our lives. An example of that is in the ICU. We have data coming from monitors, from labs, from the EHR, from the patient's subjective information or the family's information. It doesn't all intersect and aggregate except in the intern's head or on their iPad, used to be Post-its. It's actually not integrated currently in any other way. And imagine the power of being able to look at those associations, create some algorithms, and also create some early alerts. Because putting some of those pieces together actually tells you, is this patient getting early signs of infection, early signs of cardiac decompensation. So we're in a project with Johns Hopkins right now doing exactly that, and it's called the Emerge Collaboration. And it's a very exciting project. So that's pertinent data pushed to the moment of decision making. And then the other piece of this pillar is partnering. So integration means partnering and integrating our ecosystems. And the last pillar is education. Again, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but this is tech-enabled education. We're leveraging a lot of technology in the way we're teaching now, iPads in the anatomy labs, wearing glass so that we can do surgical demonstrations and have remote learning captured from that. We also have a Center for Entrepreneurship. Many of you know of that, and Stephen Blank has done the first life sciences lean launch pads there. So that's been a phenomenally educational piece for us. We've had IDEO on campus teaching us all design thinking. So education is a very important piece of this. Another important thing is the bioinformatics PhD. We're going to need a lot more people trained in informatics and the crossover between clinical and informatics. So this is an area that I want to talk to people in the room who are interested in that area of how we can accelerate and expand those programs. And then I also feel like we take advantage, you might not know it, we stalk your website and we watch your videos and we leverage a lot of the education that's happening over here. And we're very grateful for that, so I want to thank you. We also do the same with our outside partners, the incubators. We use technology in simulating education, and if you have ideas for that, I would really like to talk to you about it because we want to continue to do that. We build tools, but we also leverage them. These are examples of things we've built. These are apps. One is an MSK exam, one's a neurology exam. These are being downloaded globally now because they're in multiple languages, and that's something that was built out of a partnership with a startup, and we had all the content and the domain expertise to put into that. And down below, this just shows different technologies we're using in the clinical and the study session. This is an example of something out of the UK, and it's cognitive training, cognitive confidence before you go in the OR, and it's very interesting, the studies on this. Just knowing the steps is so important, and there are some clear differences between trainees and experienced. And so it sounds silly that you're going to learn to do surgery on an iPad, but there's a piece of it, the cognitive piece and the steps, that is really important that this has been reinforcing. This is a company that we're probably going to do co-development with. A lot of startups come to us, 6 to 10 a week, and want us to pilot. And we have to help sort through what that really means, whether they want a domain expert, whether they actually do want a pilot study design and real effectiveness study, or whether they want, what they mean by a pilot is try it for a little bit and convert to a paying customer. So we're even trying to create shared vocabulary across the disciplines. Anyway, this is just another example, and I think there's a lot of fantastic work on this campus that I'd like to leverage more in the educational setting. This just explains that we are really transforming medical education now. We're in the process of this. Bob Wachter has coined the phrase the hospitalist. I'm sure you've heard of him before. He just put out a book called The Digital Doctor. And basically one of his conclusions, because there were many different responses in the book, one conclusion is we need to change the way we train doctors. We're practicing different now. We're moving to value-based care. We have more technologies available to us. We need to know how to use data in ways we've never understood it. So we all need to be somewhat savvy as data scientists as well. So we are working very hard on changing this, and we're one of 11 campuses that the AMA has funded to create a brand new curriculum that includes informatics, includes data science, and includes different ways to leverage data and move closer to precision medicine. The last point I wanted to make was on the Know Your Audience theme, and for us, what this means is we see many things out there. There are hundreds of thousands of health apps now. Most of the wearables drop tremendously as far as utilization at 6 months. So we don't still understand, even if they're first attracted to it, we still don't understand a lot about how do we incentivize healthy life choices. And that's because we need to leverage a lot more user information up front. And I know you have deep expertise in this as well. So we've actually been trying to come up to speed, and we've partnered with some of your colleagues in learning more about design thinking. So in the advising that I do now, it's every bit a piece of it. And we actually also combine that with the lean launchpad method. So it's understanding your person, which we started doing more of that in our clinical interview training as well. Understand the person better, the empathy piece. But lean launchpad, understand all the stakeholders better. And then the behavioral sciences piece, I think, is really going to be the holy grail to empowering people to self-health. And I was a PT for 10 years, then I did exercise physiology, and I ran a cardiac rehab program, and then I went into orthopedics. There's always been important to me to teach people how to take care of themselves. And it is very challenging. And I think a lot of the answers are going to come out of the behavioral sciences. And so we actually are very fortunate to have some people on campus who are interested in digital health and design thinking and behavioral sciences. As an example is Danielle Schlosser. And she's doing phenomenal work. She's also teaching a lot of this at the NIH now in the OBSSR. So if this interests you, she'd be a good person to contact. She did the adolescent schizophrenic app I mentioned earlier that's now being used in depression. She's got a lab that's doing evaluation of these as well. And she's just now exploring other technologies that we hadn't leveraged very much in some of these innovations. So I just wanted to point this out because I think you have expertise on this campus that we could really leverage to do more of this upfront design thinking that would make the engagement, the adoption, the engagement, sustained engagement, but then that critical piece of incentivizing the healthy choice to get to the outcomes that we want. So the last part is I just really wanted to say this talk hopefully is an invitation. I really want to throw out there that there are some, I picked this slide because it has both bridges still in it. And I think there's some phenomenal bridges between our campuses that work really well and have worked for many years in a great track record. And I think we have opportunities for new bridging to happen as well. So I really welcome that, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Dr. Sawyer, I don't know if you're familiar with Cal Index, but I just received an email from Anthem Blue Cross this week that said that all medical records in California are going to be available to physicians, nurses, and so on, although not to patients. Do you know about this?
Yeah, I've actually heard of it. So there are a lot of efforts in this HIE arena, the Health Information Exchange arena, that the government set it up a while ago. So there's several problems with interoperability. One is standards. One is the industry cooperation or not cooperation. Another is they set up this concept of HIEs, which it was meant to happen, but it never actually took off in the government level. It's just getting more momentum again. But then the EHRs started creating their own HIEs. So Epic created its own, so we can share between Epic campuses now, which was also a big problem. And now the insurance companies are jumping in and trying to create their own ubiquitous patient information aggregation. There's still a lot of problems with who can access it, as you just said, and how can it be utilized. So you're going to hear many confusing initiatives, and it's a good thing to pay attention. I say you have to refresh every week in this space. So I had just heard about that. But you can imagine that they may not be willing to share with their competitor. So what we need to do is we're working with the ONC and HIT right now on our big initiative of how do we get beyond those things in a way, and I'm a little hesitant to say anything engineering-wise, but one of the analogies I hear often is the microchip industry. There was a lot of resistance to standardizing for fear that the competition wouldn't be very effective, and in the end it seemed to float most boats, and we're trying to get to that place in healthcare information.
Perfect. We have time for one more question.
That's a great talk, thank you. I was curious about the apps that you were discussing, and are those considered works, copyright owned by faculty and staff? Or are they, property UCSF, and you guys are in partnership and putting them on the store and sharing revenue?
Right. So we're working probably the same way you work, where we have novel concepts. We have a tremendous tech transfer office. We keep them very busy now with digital health. And what we do is we're teaching our faculty members more and more about how valuable they are and how valuable their ideas are and how to disclose and how to move through those processes. So if it's a full-time faculty member at UC, same regulations, then it really is a UCSF IP or copyright. And when we co-develop, we actually come into it and describe our own, and what we co-develop, then we're not a store. So we're not going to sell these things. The goal would be that we license them out to our co-development partner. What I look for in Catalyst is novel and scalable. We want things that we can identify that could be scaled up and out of the university. We actually found that we had a lot of things in the university. We were one of the earliest ones to show effectiveness in some of our mobile health technologies, and yet at the end of the grant, it was just sitting there. And so we feel it's a shame if things just die at the end of the grant, especially if they've gone through that hard step of proof of concept. So we are working very hard. Our intent with the novel and scalable technologies is to get them out and disseminate them. It's an obligation of ours. Whether they go out as a for-profit or non-profit, all those models get worked out. And if we co-develop, that's where we have gotten very creative with the models of shared IP and how does that get managed and the licensing agreements.
Since we've run out of time, we're going to, for those of us here at Berkeley today, still have time to talk to Dr. Sawyer afterwards. But I'd just like to thank you very much. That was just wonderful because it paints a beautiful picture, not only of the exciting work that's going on at UCSF, but the multiple opportunities that we have, not only for collaboration and new ideas, but also an incentive for people to get engaged in this space. So again, we're so fortunate to have collaboration already existing, wonderful ways to tie Citrus and our multiple campuses to this, and congratulations on where it is, and we thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.